Hey friends, tonight we drift into the warm, olive-scented world of ancient Greece, a land remembered for philosophers, democracy, and statues with a rather bold disregard for pants. But beneath the legends of Sparta, Plato, and marble temples lies a far less polished truth. Because while Greece helped shape the foundations of the Western world, it also handed its everyday citizens a lifestyle most of us wouldn't last a single day in. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe if this kind of calm journey through the past brings you comfort. And, if you'd like, leave a comment telling me where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I always find it fascinating. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a small fan to create that gentle hum in the background. Let's ease into this together. Welcome to ancient Greece, where your morning doesn't begin with an alarm clock, but with the sun slowly roasting your home from the inside out. Your house is humble, built of sun-dried mud bricks or rugged stone, tiny windows, no glass, just wooden shutters meant to keep out the heat, and the goats. There's no insulation, no ceiling fan. And personal space? Well, there's a corner if the family goat isn't sleeping in it. You wake early, not out of discipline, but because staying horizontal past dawn means baking like bread. In summer, the stone walls act like sponges for heat. By sunrise, they begin releasing it, straight into your skin. In winter, those same walls hold the cold, turning your room into a cave of frost. You wrap yourself in a thin sheet and hope you don't become a statue by morning. Your bed? Probably a thin mat or a straw-filled sack. No pillow, just your cloak, or maybe your arm. And if the lice were merciful last night, count it as a win. There's no tap, no sink. Water must be carried, either from the public fountain if you live in town, or from a well if you're out in the countryside. You lift a heavy clay jar to your shoulder, whispering silent hopes that you don't trip and turn your spine into dust. Bathing? That comes later, if it comes at all. In the morning, you might rinse your face, rub olive oil onto your skin, and scrape it off with a curved metal blade called a strigil. Think of it as ancient exfoliation, without the spa, the steam, or the actual cleansing. Privacy? A myth. Your family sleeps, eats, and argues in the same room. The street outside is your hallway, your gossip column, your garbage pile, and you haven't even eaten yet. Your back aches, you're sweating, your linen tunic clings in places it shouldn't. And this is the best part of your day. Ready for breakfast? Good, because it's time to eat something that makes modern fasting look indulgent. Your first bite? Barley bread, dense, dry, called maza. It's made by mixing crushed barley with water, shaping it into discs, and baking them over hot stones or straight in the ashes of last night's fire. It's like a prehistoric granola bar, just without the sweetness, crunch, or joy. You might dip it in watered-down wine, because the water alone isn't exactly reliable. There are no filters, no boiling, no cold pitchers waiting in the clay pantry. So everyone drinks wine diluted with water, not to get tipsy, but to stay alive. If you're lucky, really lucky, you might add a fig, a few olives, or a scrape of goat cheese. But odds are, you're not lucky. You're fortunate if your bread isn't hosting yesterday's flies, or doesn't snap a tooth in half when you bite into it. No eggs, no coffee, no honey, unless you've befriended a beekeeper with a soft heart. And don't expect a slow, mindful breakfast. There are no chairs, no forks. You chew, you nod, and you move on. Oh, and if you're a woman, you likely eat after the men. In many households, Women and children dine separately, often once the men are finished. So, not only is the food bleak, you also get to wait your turn to be underwhelmed. The same Greeks who gave us epic poetry and wine-fueled banquets, they barely wrote a line about breakfast. It was plain, burnt, utilitarian, and yet you eat it like a hero because it's all that stands between you and a full day of heat, labor, and the sound of arguing philosophers. Bon appetit. Try not to break a molar. Now that you've forced down your sun-dried barley brick and a sip of watered wine, it's time to freshen up, or rather, fail to. Because in ancient Greece, hygiene wasn't really about getting clean. It was about ritual, and olive oil, and soap. That's the stuff of future dreams. Your morning wash isn't so much a bath as it is an exercise in tolerance. There's no hot water, no lavender soap, and definitely no plush towels or eucalyptus-scented candles. Instead, if you're lucky, you splash yourself with cold water, drawn from a public fountain or a stone basin in the courtyard. Most people don't live near a proper bathhouse, and even if you do, it's probably crowded, and noisy, and full of strangers. So you do what everyone does. You reach for the olive oil. Yes, oil. You rub it across your skin, not to soften it, but to trap dirt, sweat, and yesterday's regrets. Then, with a curved bronze blade called a strigil, you scrape it all off, like peeling salad dressing off a sunbaked statue. This is your skincare routine. Elegant in theory, uncomfortable in practice. And yes, you're probably doing it surrounded by other people, naked, talkative, and not particularly shy. Because in ancient Greece, hygiene was social, privacy was not. Let's talk teeth. Toothbrushes? Not a thing. Toothpaste? Even less so. If you're resourceful, you might rub your gums with crushed charcoal, or rinse with a splash of vinegar if you're feeling fancy. Mostly, though, you just chew on a twig and hope. Dental care wasn't so much routine as it was a plea for mercy. Body odor? Universal? Deodorant? Doesn't exist. Perfumes? Sure, if you can afford them. A dab of rose oil or myrrh on the neck, right before you walk 5 miles in sandals through the Athenian heat. The result? A uniquely Greek aroma, dust, salt, sweat, and hope. Clothes aren't washed often. Laundry means dragging your tunic to a river and pounding it against rocks. If you're poor, your tunic probably hasn't touched water since last year's wine festival. In short, staying clean in ancient Greece means appearing slightly less revolting than you did yesterday. And that's the goal. The oil and scrape method does help, but only so much when you're living inside a wool oven. So yes, they gave us democracy, drama, and elegant marble columns. But a decent shower? Still centuries away. Now that you've scraped your way into a new day, it's time to get dressed. Spoiler alert, your ancient Greek wardrobe is limited and hilarious. You have 2 main choices, a chiton or a himation. Both are large, shapeless rectangles of linen. You wrap one around yourself, tie it at the waist or shoulder with a cord, and hope the brooch holds. There's no tailoring, no buttons, no zippers, and absolutely no defense against a strong breeze. One gust, and your entire philosophical worldview might become very public. Underwear? Not invented yet. Bras also missing. Unless you're a Spartan woman, trained to wrestle in the dirt, you're trusting some pins and prayer to keep your outfit together. Footwear? If you're lucky, you own sandals, thin strips of leather with even thinner soles. If not, you go barefoot. That means walking across sharp stones, hot earth, and the leftovers of yesterday's market. Goat tracks, crushed figs, and things better left unidentified. And sun protection? Forget it. No hats, unless you're a farmer. No sunscreen. And science hasn't really caught up yet. The Aegean sun doesn't care how wise you are. It will cook you. By midday, your shoulders are red, your feet filthy, and your linen robe clings in 4 places that defy physics. And remember, public nudity isn't taboo here. You'll walk past men training naked at the gymnasium, orators giving speeches in togas that barely stay up, and no one blinks. If you're wealthy, your tunic might be dyed, maybe a gentle saffron or a pale purple. But dyes are expensive. Most people wear off-white, beige, or the color of old dust. No one's spending saffron dye on the man who repairs fishing nets. So, you step out into the world, wrapped like a wrinkled tortilla, sweating, sunburned, and praying that brooch doesn't pop off in front of the priestess. And the worst part? You're not even halfway through your day. Welcome to ancient Greece, where military service isn't a career, it's your civic obligation, a duty, a tradition, and at times, a one-way march toward an early end. If you're a free-born male, especially in Athens or Sparta, congratulations, you're a soldier, whether you volunteered or not. By your teenage years, you're already marching in formation and sparring with wooden weapons in the phalanx, that iconic Greek tactic where soldiers stand shoulder to shoulder, holding up their massive round shields, and hoping the guy next to them doesn't sneeze and drop his. If you were born in Sparta, your military life began far earlier. At the age of 7, yes, 7, you're taken from your family and placed into the agage, a rigorous training program designed to mold you into a soldier. And by mold, I mean starve, punish, isolate, and toughen until only the most hardened boys remain. In Athens, things are slightly softer, but military service is still mandatory. 2 years of training in your late teens, followed by decades of being on call. You don't get to say, I'm more of a thinker. Even philosophers like Socrates picked up a spear, not just arguments, actual weapons. And war? It's never far. Sparta versus Athens. Athens versus Persia. Sparta versus basically everyone. Or maybe your neighbor city-state just got too bold about olive oil prices. Peace is less a time of celebration and more a brief pause before the next fight. Armor? If you can afford it. A bronze helmet, a breastplate, greaves for your legs, a round hoplon shield, and a long spear. But if you're poor, well, try not to stand in the front row. Leather and cloth don't block arrows. And here's the kicker, you bring your own gear. That's right, being a Greek soldier is a BYOB situation. Bring your own bronze. If you can't afford it, you beg, borrow, or fight lightly armed, which in ancient Greek terms means you're more likely to die first. And when you're not fighting, you're training, polishing weapons, debating military tactics in public assemblies, or rowing one of those enormous warships for hours on end. Because triremes don't row themselves. There are no pensions, no therapy, no post-war compensation, just limps, scars, and maybe a misspelled epitaph carved by a cousin who barely knew you. And if you think that sounds harsh, just wait until you hear about being a woman. In most Greek city-states, especially Athens, women had fewer rights than a decorative vase. You couldn't vote, couldn't hold office, couldn't own property outright, and rarely appeared in public without a male relative nearby. Too many public appearances? People might whisper that you were a courtesan, or worse, Spartan. Your daily routine begins before sunrise. You spin wool, you weave cloth, you grind grain by hand, you draw water, you bake bread, you manage the household. If your family owns slaves, you organize them too. You are, in essence, the CEO of the home, but with no pay, no respect, and definitely no weekends. Your social life? Extremely limited. No theater, no philosophy circles, no gymnasium visits. Those are for men. Naked ones. You spend most of your time in the gynoecium, the women's quarters. Your view of the outside world? Filtered through latticework windows. Education? If you're fortunate, you might learn basic reading. But mostly, you're taught domestic skills. Philosophy, politics, geometry, for the boys. Your mission? Marry young, bear sons, stay quiet. Marriage often comes early, in your teens, to a man twice your age, arranged by your father. Less a love story, more a contract. Dowries are expected, love not required. And once you have children, your worth is tied to your womb. Now, Sparta was different. Spartan women were educated. They trained in athletics. They owned land. They even spoke boldly in public. But their freedom existed only to serve the state's obsession with war and breeding. You were expected to produce strong warriors. That was the assignment. If your husband died, you couldn't inherit freely. Remarriage required approval. Your options shrank quickly, much like your social circle. So yes, they worshipped powerful goddesses, Athena, Artemis, Hestia. But mortal women? They were expected to stay hidden, stay obedient, and stay out of view. Ancient Athens is praised as the birthplace of democracy, and technically, it was. But don't get too excited. You probably wouldn't qualify to participate. In fact, most people in Athens were completely excluded from the democratic process. To vote in the ecclesia, the Athenian assembly, you had to be male, born to two Athenian parents, over the age of 18. Women, no vote. Foreigners, called medics, no vote. Slaves, certainly not. Children, not a chance. Roughly 90% of the population, no voice at all. This wasn't government for the people. It was government for a very specific group of sunburned men in sandals. But if you did meet the criteria, voting wasn't a privilege, it was a duty. In ancient Athens, democracy meant participation, constant participation. Laws weren't passed behind closed doors. They were proposed, discussed, and decided by massive public assemblies, sometimes involving thousands of citizens. There were no career politicians, no formal degrees, no vetting processes. Every eligible man was a part-time legislator, an occasional juror, and a surprisingly confident amateur in constitutional affairs. In fact, you could be randomly selected by lottery to oversee the treasury, manage foreign policy, or judge a murder trial. And qualifications? Not required. One day, your neighbor's fish vendor might be organizing a military expedition. The next, your uncle, who's still convinced sea monsters are real, is deciding someone's fate in court. And if someone in the city became a little too popular, too influential, or just rubbed the crowd the wrong way, there was a simple solution: ostracism. Once a year, citizens gathered with shards of broken pottery, ostraca, and wrote down the name of a person they'd like to see disappear. No debate, no trial, no appeal. If your name showed up enough times, you were exiled. 10 years. Just gone. Not because you broke the law, but because people were tired of seeing your face. Still, for all its obvious flaws, Athenian democracy was revolutionary. It gave a voice to regular men, well, to some regular men, and planted the earliest seeds of systems we still use today. But let's be clear, it wasn't fair, and it wasn't open to all. If you were a woman, silenced. A foreign-born tax-paying resident, also silenced. A slave carving stone for the Parthenon, silenced, with bleeding hands. Even philosophers who asked too many questions could end up drinking hemlock. Democracy may have been born in Greece, but if you arrived expecting equal rights and inclusion, you'd be quietly escorted out of the assembly and reminded to bring your own ostracon next time. Now, let's talk about something even more uncomfortable. Slavery in ancient Greece wasn't just accepted, it was embedded. Even modest households, not wealthy by any means, typically owned at least one slave. Not as a status symbol, but because the system made it feel as natural as sandals or sunburn. The idea that someone wouldn't own another person? Unthinkable. Slaves weren't from one place or people. They were captured from wars, taken from conquered cities, or born into it by sheer misfortune. Thracians, Phrygians, Syrians, and even other Greeks, caught on the wrong side of a border dispute. Some were kidnapped and sold, others were prisoners of war. It was a bustling, brutal trade, and business was always good. In Athens, your household slave might do everything: cook your meals, carry your water, clean your home, watch your children, stand silently at dinner while you spoke of virtue and moderation. Some slaves even managed financial affairs, keeping the accounts, overseeing shops, while their masters reclined on cushioned couches, debating the meaning of justice. Yes, the irony is heavy. But in the silver mines of L'Orient, the work was far less philosophical. Slaves, including children, crawled through narrow tunnels in total darkness, breathing toxic dust, dying slowly, all for coins that bought democracy for someone else. Some slaves were literate. They taught math and grammar, wrote official letters, and even worked as clerks. But make no mistake, they were still property. They could be beaten, sold, branded, or killed without legal consequence. And those who managed to buy or earn their freedom? Still second class. Known as freedmen, they were barred from voting, from owning land, and from full participation in civic life. They owed loyalty to their former masters and could never fully belong. And unlike later eras, ancient Greece had no abolitionist movement, no civil resistance, no public reckoning. Even revered philosophers, including Aristotle, defended the system. According to him, some people were slaves by nature. Comforting thought, isn't it? So yes, Greece gave us ethics, political theory, and breathtaking architecture, but all of it, built upon the backs of people who were never allowed to speak, never allowed to vote, never allowed to matter. That's not just a forgotten detail. It's the foundation. Feeling unwell in ancient Greece? That's unfortunate. Unless you happen to live next door to Hippocrates himself, your healthcare options include vague herbal remedies, a prayer to the gods, and a generous helping of wishful thinking. Let's begin with the basics. There are no hospitals, at least not how we imagine them. If you're sick or injured, you stay home. Maybe a neighbor remembers how to treat boils. Maybe your aunt swears by a chant to Asclepius, the god of healing. Maybe your local temple has a sacred snake you can pet for emotional support. That's about it. The most respected healers of the time were part herbalist, part philosopher, and part bold guesser. They believed your body was governed by 4 vital fluids, called humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness? That meant one of them was out of balance. Have a fever? Too much blood. Time to drain it. Chronic cough? Too much phlegm. Try starving for a while. Feeling gloomy? Clearly black bile. Take a long walk. Stare dramatically at the sea. Most treatments relied on trial and error. And garlic. You might be prescribed poppy seeds, boiled figs, or a compress made from vinegar and something scraped off a goat. Did it work? Occasionally? Did it hurt? almost always. Surgery? Rare, terrifying, and absolutely the last resort. Without anesthesia or knowledge of infection, even a shallow wound could turn septic. The tools? Iron knives, bone saws, and silent prayers. If you needed something amputated, you'd better have a leather strap to bite, and someone brave to hold you still. Childbirth? Handled by midwives, and dangerous even on a good day. Mortality rates for mothers and infants were tragically high. One complication, a breach, a twisted cord, and that could be the end. If you were wealthy, you might summon a traveling physician, someone with a scroll, some oils, and slightly better guesses. If you were poor, you relied on folklore, street cures, and resilience, or you didn't recover. But to be fair, they did believe in fresh air, rest, and balanced food. So, there's that. Greek medicine gave us the Hippocratic Oath, but also the advice to drink boiled cabbage water. So, healthcare in ancient Greece? Mostly herbs, hope, and hold on tight. Now let's take a detour to the theater. In ancient Greece, drama wasn't just for fun. It was a civic event, a sacred ritual, and sometimes an emotional endurance test. The good news? Theater was free, assuming you were a male citizen. If you were a woman, a slave, or a foreigner, well, good luck finding a seat. You'd join thousands of others in a massive open-air amphitheater, like the one built into the side of the hill at Dionysus's sanctuary. And you wouldn't just be there for a couple of hours. You'd be there all day, from dawn until nightfall. The Dionysia festival featured back-to-back performances, tragedies, comedies, and satyr plays. No breaks, no snacks, no bathrooms, unless you made use of a convenient bush on the hillside. Arrive late? You might get fined, disrupt the show, expect to be shouted at. The plays themselves? Intense. Tragedies were soul-wrenching, madness, family curses, vengeful gods punishing people for a mistake made by their ancestors 3 generations earlier. You weren't there to laugh. You were there to cry, together. And then came the comedies. Sharp, mocking, wild. They poked fun at politicians, public figures, cities, philosophers, and just about everything else, including bodily functions. Imagine a mix between political satire and absurdist theater, with giant props shaped like, well, things we won't name here. The actors? All men, even for female roles. They wore large masks, platform sandals, and exaggerated costumes that could be seen from the back row. The chorus danced, sang, and shouted commentary, like a very loud, very theatrical Greek Twitter feed. And the audience? Not quiet. They clapped, booed, heckled, and occasionally threw olives. Theater in Greece wasn't passive. It was participatory. If a play offended you, you let them know. If it moved you, you wept, shouted, and possibly questioned your life choices. At the end of the festival, a jury chose the winning playwright. So yes, you might spend 3 full days mourning the fall of Orestes' family, only to find out a lewd comedy starring a talking pig god took home the prize. Classic Greece. But now the festival ends. You're exhausted, emotionally wrung out, and as you step into the sunlight, you stumble into the agora, the city's bustling heart. And standing there, a man, wearing a cloak, barefoot. He looks you in the eye and asks, "What is justice?" Welcome to philosophy. In ancient Greece, especially in Athens, philosophy isn't just an idea. It's a lifestyle, and it's everywhere. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Today, we remember them as icons, giants of thought who shaped the world. But back then, they were mostly eccentric men wandering around barefoot, asking uncomfortable questions, and making other people feel painfully unprepared. Take Socrates, for example. He made a full-time job out of interrogating strangers, not with answers, but with more and more questions. You could be enjoying a quiet afternoon, buying olives, petting a stray goat, and suddenly he appears. Do you believe in truth? I guess. What is truth? And just like that, you're trapped in a 3-hour mental spiral and seriously considering moving to Sparta. Socrates never wrote anything down. That task fell to his student, Plato. But Socrates left a permanent mark, partly because Athens eventually sentenced him to death for being annoying. Technically, the charges were corrupting the youth and not believing in the gods. But let's be honest, he probably just asked one too many questions at someone's dinner party. Philosophy in ancient Greece wasn't cozy armchairs and warm cups of tea. It was loud, public, confrontational, and surprisingly, physical. Debates took place in streets, markets, and gyms. There were no microphones, no podiums, just voices, hand gestures, and egos large enough to echo across the Acropolis. And if you thought you could simply walk past unnoticed, not a chance. Philosophers loved pulling in bystanders. One wrong word, and suddenly you're the live example of everything wrong with unexamined life. Even children weren't spared. Aristotle himself tutored a teenage boy named Alexander, who later conquered half the known world. Imagine your high school civics teacher handing you a map and saying, "Fix this." So yes, philosophy gave us ethics, logic, science, and politics, but it also gave us headaches, identity crises, and a 70% chance of being publicly humbled by a man in sandals. Let's say, though, you've made it in ancient Athens. You're eloquent, witty, well-liked. That's your first mistake. Because in Athens, being too popular could get you exiled, not jailed, not fined, just removed. It wasn't a conspiracy, it was policy, ostracism. Once a year, the citizens voted on whether or not to have an ostracism vote. If yes, everyone grabbed a broken piece of pottery, called an ostracon, and scratched in the name of someone they wanted to send away. If a name got 6,000 or more votes, that person was banished. No trial, no charges, no defense, just goodbye. And it wasn't always villains. Often, it was heroes, charismatic leaders, skilled generals, or just someone with really good hair. You didn't have to do anything wrong. You just had to make people nervous. Democracy decided you were getting too popular, and democracy told you to take a 10-year vacation. And the strange part? It wasn't forever. After 10 years, you were welcome to return. Your home? Untouched. Your citizenship? Intact. Your dignity? Slightly dented. Some famous figures were ostracized. Aristides the Just, so admired that one voter allegedly wrote his name because they were tired of hearing how virtuous he was. Even Themistocles, the brilliant general who saved Athens from invasion, got sent packing when he became too confident. Turns out, public gratitude has an expiration date. Ostracism was designed to prevent tyrants, but often it punished success. So if you were ambitious, you had to walk a narrow line. Be admired, but not too admired. Respected, but not inspirational. It was like ancient reality TV. Gain too many fans, and you win an exile to the countryside with your sandals, your scrolls, and your olive oil stash. Athens gave the world democracy, but it also invented cancel culture, 2,500 years early. And through all of this, one fact remained. In ancient Greece, you didn't ask if you'd die young. You only wondered how soon and how painful. Life expectancy? Around 30 to 35 years. And that's if you survived childhood, which was never guaranteed. In ancient Greece, survival was never guaranteed. Roughly 1 in every 3 children didn't make it past childhood. Disease, malnutrition, and hygiene that was more theoretical than practical. You could die from almost anything. A fever no one understood. A scratch that got infected. A difficult childbirth. A leading cause of death for women. Or something as simple as drinking the wrong cup of water. Medicine was limited, and the gods weren't known for consistency. If you lived in a city, illness spread fast. Crowded homes, communal fountains, and open-air sewage systems made epidemics feel routine. During the Peloponnesian War, a plague swept through Athens, wiping out nearly a third of the population. Thucydides, the historian, wrote about it in vivid detail. He caught it, somehow survived. Most didn't. And war? Always near. If you were a man, chances were you'd die holding a spear or rowing a warship. Even if you weren't killed on the battlefield, a wound could turn deadly in days. No antibiotics, no proper bandages, just faith and garlic compresses. And then, there were the gods. Divine punishment could strike at any time. Forget an offering, mock a temple statue, say something rude about Zeus after too much wine. Suddenly, you're face to face with a lightning bolt, a plague, or an unexpected goat-related incident. Burial was sacred. If your family couldn't afford the proper funeral rites, coins for the ferryman, rituals for the journey beyond, your body might be left outside the city walls, unmarked, forgotten. And the Greeks believed that was dangerous. Spirits without a proper burial were trapped, wandering between worlds, restless. Death wasn't noble, it was daily and indiscriminate. You could be a slave, a poet, a general, and still die from a moldy fig or a particularly vengeful mosquito. The gods? They weren't your friends. In theory, ancient religion was about harmony with the divine. Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, Poseidon, the golden crowd atop Mount Olympus. But in practice, it was constant spiritual risk management. These weren't gentle, all-loving deities. They were temperamental beings with cosmic power and personal vendettas. Miss a sacrifice? They'd ruin your crops. Say the wrong prayer? Your ship sinks. Walk into the wrong sacred grove? Snakebite, famine, blight, pick one. They demanded attention, daily. Home altars, seasonal rituals, public festivals, citywide ceremonies. You didn't just believe, you maintained belief. Traveling by sea, offer something to Poseidon, planting crops, pray to Demeter, going to battle, sacrifice to Ares, and maybe toss in a goat just to be thorough. Each god had favorites and grudges. Apollo might protect your city, unless your grandfather offended him once, in which case, you're cursed until further notice. Hera was goddess of marriage, and also expert in making life miserable for any mortal woman Zeus happened to notice. Athena loved wisdom, but also turned people into spiders, charming. And beyond the Olympians, you had nymphs, satyrs, river gods, forest spirits. Step on the wrong patch of sacred dirt, and suddenly your kneecap belongs to a tree demon. The worst part? You never really knew why bad things happened. Was it the timing? The wrong prayer? Something your cousin did? Maybe something your great-grandfather forgot to offer? Didn't matter. The gods worked in mysterious and deeply petty ways. Yet still, religion was everywhere. It was woven into birth, politics, harvest, marriage, and even the Olympic Games. The temples were landmarks, the festivals, national holidays, the myths, explanations for everything from thunder to heartbreak. You didn't worship out of pure faith. You worshipped out of survival instinct. So now, after everything, the sweltering homes, the dry bread breakfasts, the sunburnt walks in sandals, the wars, the plagues, the emotional trauma from the gods. Let's ask the question directly. Would you survive a single day in ancient Greece? Honestly? Number you'd fold before lunch. The heat, the food, the ever-present chance of war or divine overreaction. It would erase that Instagram-worthy toga fantasy right off your hopeful little face. Let's be honest. You're not used to hauling water before breakfast, or squatting over a hole in the ground beside a temple goat. You'd miss running water, aspirin, and the freedom to complain without being banished via ceramic vote. The idea of living among marble statues, great thinkers, and epic poets. It sounds romantic. But that was the world of the top 1% of ancient Greece. For everyone else, it was sweat. It was labor. It was funerals. Your democracy, only if you were a male citizen. Your medicine, mostly garlic and hope. Your gods, frequently irritated. Your social media, a man yelling about justice in the agora while holding a dead fish. And yet, for all that hardship, the Greeks endured. They built temples that still stand, wrote plays that still move us, debated questions we're still answering. They didn't just survive suffering, they created civilization through it. You probably wouldn't last a day. But they did. Not because life was kind, but because they found meaning amid the chaos. They questioned everything, argued constantly, wrote beautifully, died young, and still, somehow, they shaped the modern world. No, you wouldn't survive your first sunstroke, goat bite, or unsolicited philosophy lesson in the middle of the street. But if you did endure, if you listened, adapted, and truly looked around, you'd find yourself standing among some of the most passionate, flawed, resilient souls in history. And they wouldn't judge you for struggling. They'd hand you a tunic, point toward a giant amphora, and say, "Good, now carry that up a hill." And now, we leave Greece. But not the struggle. Because far across the sea, on the misty edge of the Roman Empire, a storm was building. It began with a death and a betrayal. Prasutagus, king of the Iceni tribe in what we now call Eastern Britain, had learned how to walk the Roman tightrope. He ruled under their gaze as a client king, offering loyalty in exchange for peace. He had autonomy, wealth, stability. All he had to do was remain useful. But when he died, around 60 AD, he left behind a will, a plan, a plea. He named the Roman emperor as co-heir, alongside his two daughters, a gesture meant to preserve their safety. Rome, however, wasn't feeling generous. They didn't honor the will. They didn't negotiate. They took. With swift violence, they annexed the Iceni lands, seized livestock, looted homes, claimed treasures. But the worst was still to come. They humiliated the queen, Boudica, in public, not with words, with whips. And in front of her, they violated her daughters. It wasn't just conquest, it was a message. You are nothing. But they didn't break her. They forged her. Rome believed they had crushed a minor tribal widow beneath their boot. Instead, they had awakened a force of nature, a queen whose rage would soon set cities ablaze, a mother whose grief would become war, and a woman who would remind the empire that even giants can bleed. Word spread quickly. Other tribes listened and remembered their own losses, their stolen lands, their fallen sons. Rome thought the tribes were divided. They weren't. They were just waiting for a reason to rise. And Boudica was that reason. Rome had broken a treaty, broken a home, broken a mother's heart, and in doing so, they broke the illusion that their rule in Britain was eternal. This wasn't a minor rebellion. It was the beginning of one of the most brutal revolts Rome would ever face. If Rome expected silence, they misunderstood Boudica completely. She wasn't born to obey. She was born to lead. Even Roman historians, who rarely praise their enemies, described her as tall, commanding, with flaming red hair that fell like a banner down her back, and a voice that could cut through a battlefield. She wasn't just a ruler, she was a symbol. And now, she was a threat. But before she became a threat to the empire, she became something far deeper. A mother with nothing left to lose. Roman cruelty had stripped her of dignity, stolen her children's future, and insulted her people's very existence. But Boudica refused to be erased. She understood something Rome feared more than armies: unity. So she began forging it, tribe by tribe. First, the Trinovantes, once powerful, now reduced by taxes, land seizures, and forced labor. But when Boudica spoke, she didn't sound like a politician. She spoke as a mother, wounded but unshaken. She reminded them of their ancestors, of their gods, of the sacred soil they no longer owned. Her sorrow was theirs, her fire shared. Other tribes began to listen, the Corieltavi, the Cornovi, even some from the cautious Brigantes. Her cause was no longer vengeance. It had become something sacred, a calling, not to reclaim power, but to cleanse their homeland of Roman pride. She made no promises of safety, only of honor, even in death. And they followed her, because she didn't hide behind her army. She rode among them, spear in hand, hair flowing wild in the wind, eyes locked not on the past, but on the future. She shouted the names of the violated, the enslaved, the executed. She called upon gods, like Andraste, the Celtic war goddess, to witness their rising. And her warriors believed her. They believed the gods would rise too. She had no Roman military scrolls, no formal training, but she carried something sharper, righteous fury, tempered by betrayal, guided by purpose. And the very land seemed to move with her. This wasn't a rebellion. It was a resurrection. The Queen Rome thought it had shattered, was now leading a movement that would shake the empire. And she was just getting started. The Roman eagle had long cast its shadow across Britannia. But now, the wind was changing. Boudica's fury wasn't a wildfire. It was a storm, gathering with intention. And storms need fuel. That fuel came from across the land. Thousands who had waited, through years of silence, through generations of loss, for someone to defy Rome. Someone to speak not in Latin, but in fire and iron. She gave them that voice. War councils began in sacred groves, beneath moonlit skies, not in halls of stone, but in the dirt among the people. She listened to tribal elders, to grieving mothers, to druids murmuring omens into the night, and one truth echoed among them all. Rome had gone too far. Now it was time to push back. The Trinovantes brought slings, spears, and the chants of their forebears. The Iceni offered swift riders, fierce cavalry painted in war dyes. Other tribes joined with axes, torches, and bitter memories. Even the women took up arms, inspired by their queen. This wasn't just an army. It was a reawakening. Rome had its legions, disciplined, armored, precise. Boudica had something else. Hatred, shaped by humiliation. Her army swelled, tens of thousands. Farmers became warriors, hunters became shadows. Escaped slaves and betrayed allies switched sides. They didn't fight for coin. They fought for memory, for justice, for the right to raise children without chains. Then came her first speech. Roman historians, of course, recorded it, filtered through their politics and pride. But what endures through time is this: she would win or die. No retreat, no surrender. The first target? Camulodunum. Once a proud tribal capital, now a Roman colony draped in marble, echoing with Latin. To her people, it wasn't sacred. It was a wound, a shrine to Claudius, the emperor who had claimed their land and carved his name into their stones. That temple? It would be the first to fall. No more whispers of revolt. Now, there were footsteps, marching, guided by fury, led by a queen who would not bow. Camulodunum never stood a chance. What had once been a Roman symbol, proud villas, statues, and soldiers, was now a target. Its streets no longer hummed with ritual. They rang with tribal war cries. The city had no real defenses, no wall, no warning. Roman veterans who once bullied and taxed the locals were caught unprepared. And then, Boudica gave the order. The few Roman troops stationed in Camulodunum were unprepared. They expected taxes, not war. They scrambled to defend the colony, barricading themselves inside the temple of Claudius, believing its thick walls could withstand a siege. They were wrong. Within 2 days, Boudica's forces broke through. The city didn't fall quietly. The streets turned crimson. There were no survivors spared. No age, no rank, no plea for mercy that changed their fate. To Boudica, this wasn't just warfare. This was personal. Her warriors shattered Roman statues, burned villas to the ground, and turned their rage on everything that represented occupation and control. The temple itself, that towering monument to Roman power, was set ablaze. Its roof collapsed in a firestorm so fierce it lit the sky for miles. Those who escaped the flames carried stories so horrifying they chilled the blood of Roman commanders hundreds of miles away. But this wasn't chaos. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. These were people who had seen their land taken, their gods mocked, their children sold. Now they were taking back what had been stolen, with interest. Roman officials sent desperate messages to Governor Suetonius, stationed far away in Wales, putting down another rebellion. But by the time he learned of Camulodunum's fall, the city was already ash and silence. The colony was gone. Its citizens, dead. Its temples, rubble. And the fire of revolt was only growing. But Boudica didn't pause to celebrate. There was no time. She knew retaliation would come, and come hard. So, she marched on. Each victory gave her momentum, and her next destination was larger, richer, and far more exposed. Londinium. If Rome had dismissed her before, they would no longer have that luxury. Camulodunum had been a warning. Londinium would be the fire in the empire's chest. At the time, the city was young, barely 17 years old, but already thriving. Merchants came from every corner of the empire. Markets overflowed with trade. Imperial business was conducted under tiled roofs, and wealth flowed like water through its streets. But as Boudica's army drew near, all that wealth turned to panic. Governor Suetonius rushed back with what little force he had. He surveyed Londinium, crowded, sprawling, and vulnerable, and made a brutal decision. He abandoned it. The Roman legions were too far to help. He couldn't risk the few troops he had defending a city that could not be saved. So, he left. He took with him those who could move quickly, merchants, officials, soldiers. But the old, the sick, the hesitant, and those who couldn't believe a woman could bring down Rome, they stayed, and they would soon understand the truth. Boudica's forces arrived in Londinium like a thunderclap. There were no walls, no gates, no defense. The city was open, and Boudica made it bleed. Her warriors tore through its streets with the rage of generations behind them. They didn't come to occupy. They came to erase. This wasn't looting. This was annihilation. Roman citizens were pulled from homes, families executed, bodies impaled, temples set ablaze with people still inside. There were no exceptions, no mercy. Every symbol of Roman control, every villa, statue, storehouse was targeted. Fires rose, warehouses exploded, black smoke curled high into the sky like a dark banner of retribution. This wasn't simply a massacre, it was a message. Rome is not invulnerable. Contemporary Roman sources, like Tacitus and Cassius Dio, record tens of thousands dead. Some accounts suggest Londinium's destruction was even more complete than what had happened in Camulodunum. And still, Boudica pressed forward. In her chariot, her daughters at her side, watching as Rome's illusion of dominance crumbled beneath the wheels. This wasn't senseless destruction. To her, it was justice. For the pain Rome had carved into her family, her land, her people, and she wasn't finished. Another Romanized town stood ahead, Verulamium. And beyond that, the full weight of Roman retaliation. Rome had seen rebellions before. It had fought wars across continents. But never had it faced anyone quite like Boudica. She didn't command with polished strategy. She didn't speak Latin. She didn't wear gilded armor. And yet, she had already burned 2 cities to the ground, slain thousands, and turned Britannia's landscape into a rising flame. As Verulamium, a prosperous, unfortified Roman center, was consumed by fire, panic reached the halls of Roman power. In distant Rome, even Emperor Nero reportedly considered abandoning Britannia altogether. Imagine that. An empire that stretched from African deserts to alpine peaks, brought to its knees by one woman, a chariot, and a cause. Because Boudica's power wasn't just in her warriors, it was in what she represented. Rome believed its cities were eternal, its control inevitable. But now, a Celtic queen, once beaten and humiliated, was leading a movement that turned Roman towns into ashes. Each conquest she led wasn't just strategic, it was symbolic. Proof that Rome could be wounded, that its myth of invincibility was just that, a myth. Verulamium fell as the others had, wealthy, elegant, defenseless, its citizens slaughtered, temples leveled, records erased. Archaeologists today still find the scorched remains, a thick layer of ash beneath the modern town, a burn so intense it marked the earth itself. But victory carries its own weight. With each town razed, Boudica's forces grew larger, but harder to manage. Supplies thinned, coordination faltered. Some tribes grew careless in triumph. And Rome was recovering. Governor Suetonius hadn't surrendered. He had retreated, strategically. Now, he was pulling legions from across the province, seasoned soldiers, trained, brutal, disciplined. He chose the battlefield carefully, not a city, not open ground, a narrow defile, flanked by hills and woods. There, Boudica's numerical advantage would mean little. His force? Perhaps 10,000 men, outnumbered, but every one of them a soldier forged in war. Boudica's army? Tens of thousands. By some estimates, 200,000 strong. Farmers, blacksmiths, mothers, freed slaves, warriors from every tribe, fierce but untrained, armed with passion, but not formation. They believed they could crush Rome like a rising tide. They were wrong. Before the battle, Boudica stood in her chariot, her daughters beside her, her warriors before her. She gave one last speech. She spoke of their pain, the floggings, the rapes, the stolen land, the shattered homes. She invoked their ancestors, called upon the goddess Andraste, and vowed victory or death. Her warriors roared in response. They believed the gods would carry them. Then the battle began. The Britons charged. Their cry filled the valley. a wave of fury. But Suetonius held firm. The Roman line didn't move. They waited, tight, shield to shield, until the enemy was close. Then, with chilling precision, Rome struck. Spears flew, short swords followed, each blow deliberate. Wave after wave of Britons crashed into a wall of iron and broke. Then the Romans advanced, step by step, unyielding, unforgiving. Behind the Britons, wagons, families, and spectators had followed the army, expecting to witness Rome's defeat. But now they became an obstacle. There was no retreat, and panic began to spread. The narrow battlefield became a graveyard, a place where hope met steel and shattered. When the dust finally settled, it was over. Tens of thousands of Britons lay silent. The rebellion, once blazing like wildfire, had been extinguished. Rome had bent, but it had not broken. Boudica had thrown everything she had into the fire, her fury, her grief, her people, and though she lost the battle, what remained was louder than swords. Memory, her final fate, a mystery. The battlefield lay still, the moans of the dying the only sound beneath a cold gray sky. She had not only lost a war, but a dream she had lit with her own hands. And then, she was gone. No captured queen paraded through Rome. No chains, no final humiliation, no public execution. She vanished. Roman historians don't agree on how she died. Some say she drank poison, choosing dignity over chains. Others claim she fell ill and faded away quietly in the wake of defeat. But all sources concede the same truth. She disappeared, like a storm that burned itself out on its own brilliance. But in that vanishing, something remarkable happened. She became more than a queen. She became myth. Rome tried to erase the memory, but it was too late. Her name was already whispered in tribal songs, echoed in sacred groves. To the Britons, she wasn't a failed rebel. She was a mother, a warrior, a spirit of vengeance, a goddess in mortal form who had stood against the might of the empire and made it bleed. Even the Romans respected her. Tacitus, the Roman chronicler, wrote of her not as a savage, but as a formidable figure, wronged by the arrogance of empire. Cassius Dio spoke of her fire, her presence, her speeches that stirred terror and awe alike. They feared her, but they admired her, and across the centuries, Boudica refused to fade. She rose again, in marble, in bronze, in verse, in Victorian statues, in the lines of Tennyson, in school books, in protest signs. She became a symbol, especially for women, of a fire that could never be put out. Her chariot, its spiked wheels no longer on earth, rolled across time, a vehicle of resistance. Though her body is lost to history, her voice never left. It moves with the wind, it crackles in the fire, it stirs in the soul of anyone who has ever stood on trembling legs and whispered, "I will not kneel." Centuries have passed since Boudica vanished into history's mist, but her shadow still lingers over the British Isles. You'll find her name on plaques, etched into monuments, whispered in speeches. And if you stand near Westminster Bridge in London, you'll see her statue, cast in bronze, riding a chariot, her daughters beside her, eyes locked on the horizon, wheels lifted in defiance. Below her, the traffic flows. Tourists pass, unaware that they walk in the echoes of her rebellion. But Boudica's legacy is not just metal and stone. It's a question, eternal, unyielding. What happens when the silenced rise? She wasn't perfect. Her revolt left thousands dead. There was blood, there was fury, there was fire. But history is rarely written by saints. It is shaped by those who dare to resist. In ancient Egypt, healing wasn't just a science, it was sacred. The god Thoth was believed to have gifted humanity the very secrets of medicine, and Sekhmet, lion-headed goddess of war and plague, was both feared and worshipped. She could send disease, or she could remove it, depending on how you prayed. When healers treated patients, they didn't just apply herbs, they spoke over them. Because in Egypt, words had power. Incantations weren't filler. They were sound-shaped medicine, a prescription in syllables. One of their greatest healing tools? Honey. Used as an antiseptic long before bacteria was understood. They would bandage wounds with it, sometimes blending it with resins or lint. Garlic and onions were taken for heart health. Castor oil served as a laxative, and even moldy bread was pressed into infected wounds, an early accidental form of antibiotics centuries ahead of its time. Egyptian physicians, known as SWNW, treated both peasants and royalty. Their reputation stretched beyond the Nile. Neighboring kingdoms would send for them in difficult cases. Some doctors specialized: eyes, digestion, spiritual affliction. But there was never a line between physical and divine. A fever might come from mosquitoes, or from an angry spirit. To heal the body, you had to calm the gods, cleanse the soul, and restore balance to the cosmos. In Egypt, a healer's highest role was not to cure illness, but to realign the universe. Meanwhile, across the Indian subcontinent, another philosophy was taking root. It did not see the body as a machine. It saw it as cosmos made flesh. This was Ayurveda, a Sanskrit word meaning the science of life. More than a system, it was a way of living, a path to harmony with seasons, diet, thought, and breath. At its heart lay the three doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, each a blend of the five elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Vata governed movement, Pitta, transformation, Kapha, stability. Everyone was born with a unique combination. An illness? That meant imbalance. Too much fire, not enough earth. Too much stress, cold food, grief, or heat. The ancient Ayurvedic texts, like the Karaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita, were written over 2,000 years ago. These weren't just books. They were living manuals. Karaka emphasized prevention. The idea that the first treatment is simply not getting sick. Sushruta, on the other hand, was a pioneer of surgery. He described over 300 procedures and more than 120 instruments, many made from bronze or carved wood. One of his most astonishing contributions? Rhinoplasty. Reconstructing the nose using skin flaps from the cheek or forehead, not for beauty, for dignity. It was often used to repair faces mutilated as punishment, centuries before Western medicine would catch up. Ayurveda had already mapped the path, but its strength wasn't in steel, it was in wholeness. You couldn't treat the body without healing the mind and cleansing the spirit. Treatments included herbs, oil massages, abhyanga, breathwork, pranayama, meditation, fasting with intention. Plants like turmeric, neem, tulsi, and ashwagandha were not ingredients. They were protectors of life force. To an Ayurvedic healer, a fever might mean more than infection. It might mean grief, imbalance, a fire in the belly that needed soothing. Because in this view, you are not separate from nature. You are nature. And illness is nature's call to come back to balance. In ancient China, wellness was never just about the flesh. It was about energy. The invisible life force known as qi, pronounced chi, flowed through every living being. To stay well, qi had to move, unblocked, unburdened. If it became stagnant, the body suffered. From this belief grew one of the oldest continuous medical traditions in the world, traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM. To understand illness, healers first studied the patterns of nature, the seasons, the moon, animal migrations, the turn of stars, and from this, two great principles emerged: yin and yang, and the five elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Yin was shadow, stillness, coolness. Yang was light, motion, heat. Health meant harmony between the two. Not too much, not too little, just balance. If yin overwhelmed, fatigue, cold limbs, sluggish digestion. If yang dominated, fever, agitation, dryness. They didn't simply ask where it hurt, they asked when it hurt, what time of day, what emotion rose with it. Was it tied to grief, to anger, to worry? Because healing, for them, wasn't about removing symptoms. It was about restoring rhythm. In traditional Chinese medicine, every organ, every emotion, every function was classified under the twin forces of yin and yang. Opposites, but not enemies. Partners in constant dance. Health wasn't a fixed state. It was dynamic balance. A fever, not just a rise in temperature, an excess of yang. Fatigue, not just tiredness, a depletion of yin. Diagnosis was an art, not a technology. Ancient Chinese physicians didn't rely on tools. They relied on the senses. They examined the tongue, color, shape, texture. They felt the pulse, at multiple positions, with varying pressures. They listened to your voice, its strength, rhythm, tone. And they asked about your dreams, your emotions, your digestion. Every answer, every detail, was a thread in the tapestry of qi. To restore balance, they turned to a vast toolkit. Acupuncture, placing fine needles along invisible meridians to unblock energy flow. Moxibustion, burning dried mugwort near key points to warm and stimulate the system. Cupping, herbal decoctions, qigong exercises, and precise dietary guidance. Each treatment chosen not just for the body, but for the energy beneath it. The foundational text, the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon, compiled 2,000 years ago, remains essential even today. It wasn't just a list of symptoms. It explored why disease happened, how anger, grief, fear, when left unchecked, could harm the liver, the lungs, the heart. Health was a harmony between inner and outer worlds. Climate, food, breath, thought, all interconnected. And in every heartbeat, qi was speaking. The healer's role was simply to listen. Meanwhile, in the temples of Greece and the forums of Rome, medicine began to shift. It started to lean away from the divine and toward the rational. But the soul of medicine still belonged to balance. And at the heart of this new system stood a theory that would shape Western medicine for more than 1,000 years: the four humors. First proposed by Hippocrates and later refined by Galen, the humoral theory imagined the body as governed by four essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, each tied to an element: air, water, fire, and earth. Each tied to temperament: sanguine, phlegmatic, choleric, melancholic. A healthy body, balanced humors, illness, an excess or deficiency, too much yellow bile, you burned hot, angry, feverish, too much phlegm, you grew pale, slow, cold. Treatment focused on restoring equilibrium, bloodletting, purging, diets, herbal baths. But Hippocratic medicine also encouraged something else: observation. Physicians were taught to study the whole person, not just the symptoms. They considered the wind, the water, the seasons, even the patient's mood and dreams. The famous Hippocratic Oath, still referenced today, urged doctors to do no harm, to treat not just the illness, but the human being. Across the Greek world, healing sanctuaries rose. Asclepia, named after the god of medicine, Asclepios. They weren't hospitals, they were spiritual retreats. Patients would sleep in sacred dormitories, hoping to receive healing visions in dreams. cleansing rituals, meditation, exercise, prayer, all part of the cure. Here, reason and religion walked side by side. In Rome, medicine expanded. Galen, the Greek physician to emperors and gladiators, dissected animals to understand anatomy, recorded hundreds of medical observations, and standardized humorism throughout the empire. Though many of his conclusions would later be challenged, his influence endured for centuries, because Galenic medicine, for all its mystical roots, began pointing towards something new. That the human body, for all its mystery, was not unknowable. It was a system, complex, yes, but understandable, treatable, and perhaps restorable. Healing was never about gods alone. It was about ritual, observation, instinct, and the quiet art of knowing where to place your hands. Long before formal texts, before medical schools and sterile instruments, people across the world were healing their communities through knowledge not written, but lived, through stories, through visions, through generations of listening to the rhythms of the land. In many indigenous cultures, medicine wasn't a profession. It was a way of life, woven into daily habits, seasonal ceremonies, and sacred relationships with nature. Among Native American tribes, the medicine man, or woman, was more than a healer. They were storytellers, guides, keepers of wisdom. Illness was never just biological. It was a rupture between the person and the earth, or the tribe, or the ancestors, or the spirit within. Healing required more than a plant. It required reconnection. The Cherokee, the Lakota, the Navajo, each held encyclopedic knowledge of the land, which bark to boil, which leaf to chew, which flower to burn, sage, cedar, sweetgrass, tobacco, not just ingredients, but sacred tools used in smudging ceremonies to cleanse both body and soul. But healing didn't stop at the physical. A broken spirit could cause illness too. And in those cases, healers would guide the patient through sweat lodges, vision quests, or soul retrieval rituals. Through song, through trance, through silence. Across the world, the wisdom echoed. In the Amazon rainforest, shamans drank ayahuasca, not for escape, but for insight. They believed the plants were teachers, revealing the true roots of pain through dreams and visions. In Aboriginal Australia, bush medicine blended herbs and clay with stories passed through the dream time, an ancestral dimension that still maps their world today. Healing there meant rebalancing the relationship between body, land, and spirit song. None of this was written. It lived in songs, in dances, in rivers, in roots. To these healers, modern medicine might have its wires and scans, but the earth was the first pharmacy. And healing? It's not about conquering disease. It's about remembering who we are. Across every ancient culture, no matter the language, no matter the gods, one truth remained. Healing was never just physical. It began in the unseen world. In Mesopotamia, long before the word doctor existed, priests and exorcists battled disease with chants and clay talismans. Spirits caused illness. Rituals drove them out. In Egypt, no wound was bandaged without first whispering to Thoth or Sekhmet. Honey might seal the skin, but the gods were needed to seal the soul. In many African traditions, healers known as ngangas or sangomas entered trance states, traveling the spirit world on behalf of their patients. They used herbs, yes, but also bones, drums, and dreams, because true healing meant finding the fracture you couldn't see with the eyes. So, what did the ancients believe? That to heal a person, you must treat the whole of them, the breath, the memory, the pain unspoken, the imbalance unnoticed. And whether it was through herbs, or humming chants, or midnight prayers beneath stars, the message was the same. You are not broken. You are out of balance. And the path to health is not just a prescription. It is a return to rhythm, to ritual, to remembering. Even in classical Greece, ritual never disappeared. In the Asclepiaea, sacred temples devoted to healing, patients were guided through purification, fasting, and prayer. At night, they would sleep in sacred dormitories, enkoimesis, beneath the statues of Asclepios, the god of medicine. They waited for dreams, visions that would be interpreted by the temple's priests to guide their healing path. Ritual wasn't superstition. It was structure. It gave pain a language, suffering a framework, illness a purpose. Through symbolic acts, fear could become hope, isolation, connection, chaos, something sacred. And perhaps more importantly, it reminded the sick that they were not alone. Even today, science studies the placebo effect, the power of belief, the healing capacity of intention. The ancients didn't need the data. They already knew. Sometimes, a word spoken with reverence heals deeper than any blade, because not all wounds are visible, and not all medicine is made of matter. When we imagine ancient surgery, we often picture trembling hands, crude tools, and unspeakable pain. But the truth is more impressive and more human. Across the ancient world, surgery was practiced with courage, precision, and skill. These early healers didn't have anesthesia, x-rays, or antiseptics, but they had generations of knowledge earned through trial and necessity. In India, the Sushruta Samhita, written over 2,000 years ago, described more than 300 surgical procedures. Its author, Sushruta, is considered the father of surgery. He detailed how to remove tumors, set bones, repair hernias, and even reconstruct noses, a form of early plastic surgery used to restore dignity after punishment. His tools were diverse and exact: forceps, scalpels, probes, and needles, made from bronze, iron, even sharpened stone. Sushruta insisted on hygiene, preparation, understanding anatomy, often by dissecting animals. His teachings crossed borders, influencing Islamic and European medicine for centuries to come. In ancient Egypt, medicine and ritual worked hand in hand. Scrolls like the Ebers Papyrus reveal surgical techniques, stitching wounds, resetting limbs, draining abscesses. Tools have been found in tombs: bronze blades, bone saws, cauterizing irons. They even practiced trepanation, cutting a hole in the skull to relieve pressure or release spirits. And patients survived. Healed bone proves it. Surgery wasn't only common, it was often successful. And it wasn't just Egypt. In pre-Columbian Peru, hundreds of trepanned skulls have been unearthed, some from warriors, some from ritual. In some regions, over 80% of those operated on survived, based on signs of bone regeneration. Pain was eased with coca leaves or fermented maize beer. Herbal antiseptics followed. In the Greco-Roman world, Galen advanced surgical knowledge by dissecting animals and treating wounded gladiators. He mapped nerves, vessels, and systems that would inform Western medicine for generations. Roman military surgeons worked efficiently, using clamps, ligatures, and battlefield improvisation. Surgery was dangerous, but it was respected. This was not butchery. It was bravery. To cut into life and pull health from pain. These were not just physicians. They were artists of the blade. And though their understanding was incomplete, their legacy endures. Every time a scalpel is raised to heal, not to harm. Today, we live in a world of robotic arms and digital scans. We can read our DNA, transmit test results across continents, print organs, predict disease. But in the quiet corners of medicine, in the soft rustle of a healing touch, a whispered reassurance, a hand held beside a hospital bed, the ancient world still lingers. Because for all our machines, for all our data, and all our pills, we still seek what they sought: balance, connection, meaning. And we still carry the same unshakable hope that pain is not the end, that healing is possible, that someone, somewhere, knows how to make us whole again. You can still find Ayurveda in modern yoga studios. Chinese herbal formulas line the shelves of pharmacies, and in some hospitals, you might witness a smudging ceremony, sage smoke curling through fluorescent light, offered to honor a patient's tradition. Medical students still recite a version of the Hippocratic Oath, vowing to do no harm, just as healers once did in the temples of Kos and Pergamon. In the sterile light of today's operating rooms, we use tools whose ancestors trace back to Sushruta's iron instruments. Concepts like holistic care, prevention, and the mind-body connection, cornerstones of modern integrative medicine, were once whispers on sacred wind in ancient forests and candlelit temples. Because for those civilizations, healing was never a task, it was a relationship. And modern science, in its pursuit of the future, has begun to circle back. Studies now confirm what the ancients knew by heart: that stress, grief, loneliness can weaken the immune system, disturb sleep, and invite pain. That meditation, once dismissed as spiritual fluff, can alter the brain. That nature, just by being near, can soothe anxiety. That belief, even without substance, can heal. We call it the placebo effect. They called it faith. It's easy to view ancient medicine as outdated, superstition, guesswork, primitive trial and error. But look closer, and you see something else. You see a worldview where illness was never just about a broken machine. It was about a disturbance in being, a signal that something had come out of harmony, out of rhythm. And that idea still matters, because medicine isn't just about treatment. It's about meaning. It's about comfort, about being seen, about being understood. The ancients knew that, without data, without scans, whether through chants or leaves or iron blades. They knew healing was sacred. And perhaps, as we dive into AI, biotech, and personalized genomes, we're not leaving them behind. We're returning to them, with new tools, but the same longing, the same human heart, a heart that still seeks balance, wholeness, healing, not just of body, but of spirit. And now, let's follow the thread of that spirit into a quieter story, a different kind of legacy, not shaped in temples or surgery, but in words. Her name drifts through history like a half-remembered melody. Sappho, a poet from the island of Lesbos, born around 630 BCE, whose voice once stirred listeners beneath the starlight, and whose fragments still echo with longing. She was no conqueror, no queen, no general. Her fame didn't come from battle, but from emotion. She didn't wield a sword, she wielded a lyre, and wrote not for crowds, but for the soul, of love, of jealousy, of beauty, of loss. She captured a glance, a blush, a breath, and held it in verse like a pressed flower, delicate, but eternal. We know so little of her life, no portraits, no journals, only fragments, quoted in later works, found on ruined scrolls, preserved in whispers. But what remains still shines. The Greek philosopher Plato called her the 10th muse, and centuries later, translators and poets would chase her shadow, piecing together her life like an unfinished song. Sappho was likely born into nobility on Lesbos, a place of music, learning, and lyric tradition. She may have had siblings, a daughter, political enemies, exile. But what endures is not her biography. It is her voice. In a world where most women were kept quiet, she spoke, not with defiance, but with beauty. Her poems, written in the Aeolic dialect, were short, vivid, personal, designed not for reading, but for singing. "Evening star," she wrote, "you bring back all that the shining day has scattered." Words like those outlived empires, and just as quietly as she arrived, she faded from the record. Much of her work is gone, burned, buried, dismissed. But what remains proves one thing. She didn't need monuments. Her poems were her monument. And even now, when we speak of love without shame, of longing that lingers for centuries, of verses that tremble with truth, we are still whispering her name. Sappho. To understand her, you must understand Lesbos, the island that cradled her voice. Lesbos was no remote outpost. In the ancient Greek world, it was a flourishing center of music, poetry, and philosophy. Fertile valleys, olive groves, sea winds perfumed with salt and blossom. It was a paradise of nature and a jewel of culture. It wasn't Athens. It didn't need to be. It had its own rhythm, slower, more sensual. A place where lyric poetry wasn't entertainment. It was devotion. The sound of the lyre filled the air. Music echoed in homes and temples. Poetry was not written. It was sung. And in that world of melody and sun-warmed stone, Sappho's voice took shape. She lived in Mytilene, the island's lively heart. There were political factions, rivalries, exiles. Even Sappho herself was once sent away, perhaps to Sicily. But it was always Lesbos that pulled her home again. It wasn't just where she lived. It was her muse. And Lesbos was also rare in another way. It gave space, real space, to women. Aristocratic girls were educated in music, poetry, and ritual. And Sappho, it is believed, led a Thiassos, a circle of women devoted to learning, art, and Aphrodite. Not a formal school, a sacred sisterhood, where emotion was taught, where love was sung, where beauty was named. Sappho's poems were not about distant gods or grand battles. They were written to the women around her, named, remembered, cherished. She didn't write abstract muses. She wrote friends, lovers, departures mourned, hair braided, voices missed. In one fragment she writes, "I have not had one word from her. I beg you, bring her back to me." This isn't myth. It's not theater. It's a heartbroken whisper from a room full of lamplight and song. And though centuries would try to distort her, turning her story into scandal, shame, or silence, Lesbos was the ground where her truth took root. She didn't just live on the island. She became it. Its breath, its song, its soul. At a time when Homer's epics filled scrolls with gods, warriors, and conquest, Sappho wrote of something smaller and far more human. A glance, a blush, a trembling voice. She was among the first to write in the first person, not to narrate history, but to feel it. She wrote as a woman, to women, about women. In a world where female voices were confined to the home or silenced entirely, Sappho didn't demand space. She created it, not through rebellion, but through rhythm. A space where vulnerability was not weakness, but power. And within that space, she did something extraordinary. She named the women she loved. She didn't hide behind metaphor. She didn't reduce them to idealized forms. She remembered how they smelled, how they laughed, how they left. In one of her most famous fragments, she writes of seeing a woman she adores speaking to another. "He is equal to the gods. that man who sits beside you, who listens to your sweet voice and watches your lovely laughter. Oh, it makes my heart beat fast. There, she is the observer, the outsider, the jealous lover, and in just a few lines, she captures the ache of unrequited love, something ancient and eternal. Her poetry carried the erotic, but never the crude. She described sensuality with the tenderness of a painter, the curve of a neck, the weight of sleep, the way moonlight touched a shoulder. Beauty and intimacy were the same. And for this, later centuries struggled. They tried to silence her, censor her, straighten her story. Some erased her queerness. Others turned her love into tragedy. But none of it diminishes the truth of her voice. Sappho didn't write poetry. She composed music for the soul. She spoke of love, not as theory, but as someone who had lived it, deeply, openly, without apology. Her verses were not meant to be read in silence. In ancient Greece, poetry was alive. It was voice, vibration, breath. Sappho's form was the lyric, short, intensely personal, crafted to be sung with a lyre, a small stringed instrument cradled in the lap, fingers dancing gently as the voice carried the words like a breeze over still water. This was the heart of lyric poetry, and it's where our word lyrical comes from. Sappho's poems weren't epics. They didn't recount battles or celebrate gods. They were confessions, whispers, love letters sung in lamplight, beneath fig trees, or across temple courtyards. And Sappho? She was its undisputed master. Her poems were written in Aeolic Greek, a dialect soft in sound and rich in rhythm. Her preferred meter, now called the Sapphic stanza, flowed like breath itself. 3 long lines, followed by one shorter, almost like a sigh at the end of a thought too full to finish. A rhythm of yearning. She likely performed surrounded by women, students, companions, perhaps even priestesses. These were not classrooms, they were sacred spaces, circles where emotion, song, and body were whole. She taught more than verse. She passed down a way of feeling, a way of speaking truth in rhythm and melody. We can only imagine what it sounded like, the soft twang of strings, the rising clarity of her voice, the hush of listeners leaning closer to every syllable. Many of her poems opened not with statements, but invocations. Come to me now, O golden-throned Aphrodite, and free me from hard care. They were not only songs, they were prayers, conversations, desires, sung aloud with trembling honesty. Sappho reminded the world that emotion is music, that every thrill of touch, every tremor of voice deserves a melody, and hers is one we still hum across centuries. But for every line of hers that survives, dozens, perhaps hundreds, are gone. What we have are fragments, shards of passion, phrases torn from larger songs, whispers. Some are full stanzas, others single words, or slivers of longing, a closing thought with no beginning. And yet, even in their brokenness, they breathe, like embers glowing in the ash of something once brilliant. Why did so much vanish? Time, war, and deliberate erasure. Her poems were once collected into 9 volumes, catalogued in the Library of Alexandria. They were copied, recited, celebrated. But when that library burned, so did her words. Later, as Christian influence spread, texts deemed pagan, erotic, or unorthodox were suppressed. Sappho's poetry, with its intimacy, its queerness, its unashamed celebration of female desire, was targeted. By the medieval period, she had become a ghost. Her name survived, but her voice had been almost entirely silenced. Only through quotes in grammar books, commentaries, or philosophical texts did tiny pieces escape destruction. And even then, They were cited for grammar, not for beauty. But the feeling still leaked through. Then came the rediscoveries. In the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists digging in the Egyptian sands of Oxyrhynchus uncovered thousands of scraps of ancient manuscripts. Among them, torn, fading lines of Sappho, songs lost for over 1,000 years. Then, in 2004, a nearly complete poem was found wrapped around a mummy in Germany. Each recovery felt like a resurrection, like a voice clearing its throat after centuries of silence. And yet, so much remains missing. We read her today in echoes. We hear the pain, but not the full story. And perhaps what we long for most is not only what she said, but what she might have said if history had let her speak uninterrupted. There's something fitting, hauntingly fitting, in the fact that Sappho survives through fragments. She wrote about the ephemeral, the fleeting, the beautiful that vanishes between your fingers. So perhaps it's appropriate that her poetry arrives to us not as a monument, but as a mystery, a puzzle of breath and longing, pieced together by lovers of language, of music, of the soul, a voice once drowned in fire, still burning. During her life, she was celebrated, admired, recognized as a master of lyric poetry. Plato himself called her the 10th muse, and yet, as centuries turned, her legacy twisted, silenced, scandalized, or softened into something it was never meant to be. Why? Because she wrote about love, and not the kind history felt comfortable preserving. She loved women. She praised their beauty, confessed her jealousy, sang of their absence, and cherished their nearness. In her time, this was not scandal. Among aristocratic women of Lesbos, deep emotional, romantic, and possibly physical bonds were not erased. They were respected. But later eras, Roman, Christian, Victorian, struggled. So they rewrote her. Medieval scribes ignored her. Renaissance translators diluted her language. Victorian storytellers gave her a new myth, that she leapt from a cliff for love of a man named Phaon. A myth nowhere found in her true work. It was invention, an erasure. Her queerness, too radical. Her passion, too raw. Her voice, too powerful. Some reduced her poetry to moral lessons or educational allegory. Others dismissed her entirely. And yet, she persisted, even in silence, even in distortion. Her name became a code, a beacon. In the 19th century, when same-sex love was taboo, Sappho became a quiet symbol of queer identity. The words sapphic and lesbian took root in her legacy, a home for those who had none. She became, without trying, a figure of resistance, a poetic ancestor for every silenced heart. And still the debates echo. Who was she? A teacher, a lover, a threat, a myth? But maybe the better question is, why are we still afraid of her truth? She didn't write to fit a mold. She wrote what she felt. She named beauty. She owned desire. She lived through verse. Her scandal wasn't her love. It was her honesty. And for that, history tried to muffle her. But it never succeeded. If there was one divine force that hovered close to Sappho's soul, it was Aphrodite, goddess of love, of beauty, of longing that burns and redeems. To Sappho, Aphrodite wasn't myth. She was presence, confidant, muse, companion. Many of Sappho's most powerful verses aren't just poems, they are prayers. "Come to me now," she writes. "If ever you answered my voice in the past, free me from hard care." No shame, no fear. Desire for her was not sin. It was sacred, worthy of summoning a goddess. And Aphrodite? She wasn't romance in the modern sense. She ruled over seduction, longing, the ache of absence, the thrill of closeness, the devastation of rejection. To call on her was to recognize that love is both medicine and fire. And Sappho captured that duality like no one before her. She didn't idealize love. She inhabited it. She wrote of its sweetness and its cruelty, its power and its destruction. "Love shook my soul," she wrote, "like the wind on the mountain troubling the oak trees." Here, love is not gentle. It is elemental, a force that moves through you whether you're ready or not. By placing Aphrodite at the center of her emotional universe, Sappho didn't diminish her desire. She elevated it. She blurred the line between human ache and divine passion, between a song whispered in the dark and the voice of a goddess answering back. So yes, most of her poems are gone, burned, lost, buried. But what survives, those lines that flicker like starlight on ancient seas, they still reach us. And in those fragments, she is whole. In writing of love, Sappho didn't just explore a theme. She built a sanctuary, a place where longing was not weakness, but worship, where desire was divine. For Sappho, Aphrodite wasn't just a distant goddess. She was a mirror, a force that reflected every ache, every contradiction, every radiant pulse of the human heart. And in every surviving line of her verse, Aphrodite listens and answers. Like her poetry, Sappho's death is wrapped in silence. No records, no dates, no final resting place. Some say she died peacefully on Lesbos, the sea humming just beyond her window, her voice echoing in the breeze. Others, centuries later, told a tale that she leapt from the white cliffs of Lefkada, heartbroken over a man named Phaon. But that story is a fabrication, a neat ending crafted by a male literary tradition unwilling to accept her truth. A woman who loved women, transformed into a victim of unrequited love for a man. The truth is quieter, more powerful. Sappho vanished as softly as she arrived, but her voice lingered. She was quoted by philosophers, sung in festivals, and studied in schools. For a time, her fame rivaled Homer's. 9 volumes of lyric verse once sat proudly in the library of Alexandria. But history is not always kind to voices that challenge its norms. With the rise of the Roman Empire and later Christian moral codes, Sappho's poems, emotional, sensual, and sapphic, were cast aside, ignored, neglected, or burned. By the Middle Ages, her name remained, but her voice had faded, and yet she survived. In the 1800s and early 1900s, fragments of her work were recovered, from Egyptian trash heaps, from the margins of ancient grammar books, from scrolls buried with mummies. Each discovery was a resurrection, a breath restored. She was never truly lost, only waiting. She didn't need a tragic ending. She didn't need a heroic death. Her words were already immortal. Even in the gaps, we feel her spirit, yearning, unfinished, but never gone. Her life may be blurred by time, but her influence has only grown, like a candle that flickers, but never goes out. In every age, someone finds her again. Renaissance scholars marveled at her rhythm. Romantic poets evoked her name. Modern voices reclaimed her as a symbol of queer resilience, of emotional freedom, of feminine power. Her name lives on in language itself, sapphic, lesbian, not just words, but echoes, proof that one voice, once nearly erased, can ripple through centuries and still shape how we speak of love. Artists still imagine her bathed in moonlight, a lyre in her lap, her voice carrying over the Aegean. Writers translate her again and again, each version searching for the pulse beneath the poetry. She has been reimagined in novels, resurrected in songs, and spoken on stages. And through it all, one truth endures. Sappho speaks to something universal. It doesn't matter that most of her poems are broken. It doesn't matter that her biography is shadowed. What matters is the emotion that burns beneath the words, the trembling joy of touch, the quiet ache of absence, the sacredness of beauty. These are feelings we all carry. She just found the melody. Perhaps that is her true immortality, not marble statues, not footnotes, but the way a few lines from 2,000 years ago can make someone stop, breathe, and feel less alone. Sappho's gift was never just poetry. It was presence. She made emotion into art, longing into truth. And in doing so, she became more than a poet. She became a mirror for anyone who has ever loved quietly, boldly, or in defiance of the world. And as long as human hearts break and heal through language, Sappho will remain, not just remembered, but felt.